Welcome into episode 173 of the Skate Podcast. I'm Brian DeFelice, joined by Bridget Prue and Scott McLaughlin. Bruins have now lost 3 of 4. They lose to the Blackhawks 6-3 last night in Chicago. Birthday boy Scotty McLaughlin. What are your initial takeaways from that game? Are you nervous at all? The Bruins Cup chances out the window now after a 3-4 skid.
First off, thanks for the birthday acknowledgement. Turning 25 today, of course.
Oh, congratulations.
Yeah. No.
It's a fun birthday. It's a fun year.
I mean, this was an ugly loss. Like, it's at some point you feel like pride has to kick in. You know, we've talked about plenty how these are going to be some tough games to get up for. You know, they're not really playing for anything, like unless Carolina goes on a run and challenges them for the number 1 seed or something. But you've now lost 2 in a row to non-playoff teams. A Red Wings team that's sold at the deadline, yes, still has some talent, but is not a team that, you know, should be getting up 4-0 on you. And then lose to the Blackhawks, who are competing for Connor Bedard in the number 1 pick. Like, that's just inexcusable, no matter where you are in the standings, no matter how good of a season you're having. You know, not panicking. I'm not saying like, oh, Bruins are doomed. They ran out of steam. It's all over. No, but they had a really bad game against a really bad team, and they should have been a lot better. You know, I wrote about this morning and just posted. I thought the third pairing of Forbort and Clifton was especially bad. They were really directly at fault on 3 of the goals where, you know, one, Clifton kind of gives up chasing a guy in the rush. I think he thought Entwistle was going to stay to the outside, and he just went right to the net and scored. Forbort loses a battle in the corner and then kind of loses his guy in front of the net on second goal. And then Forbort just gets blown by Boris Tkachuk on the rush, and Tkachuk rifles a shot past Ullmark. I didn't think Ullmark played very good. I thought there were a couple of those goals he should have done better on. So rare off night for him. That didn't help.
The first goal was definitely not characteristic of him.
Yeah, that was like the one hand kind of slided through the 5-hole. So whole team went off. I thought, like I said, the third pairing especially. But yeah, now you see how they respond. Now they're getting, you know, the first team on this road trip that is a playoff team. The Winnipeg Jets is a team that's, you know, should be in, but it's still fighting. You know, they're not secure yet. So this will be a test for the Bruins. Like, let's see how they respond, because I think they should be kind of embarrassed right now. You know, losing 6-3 to the Blackhawks when you're on this record-setting pace and you're the best team in the NHL, like that should be a little bit of a wake-up. That should, you know, get them pretty fired up.
Yeah, they were, and it's not even that they lost to such a bad team that they're obviously expected to win. They just looked so bad, like, the whole game. It's hard to think of, like, stretches of, like, 5 minutes together where they didn't look like they were getting beat or beating themselves, really. Turnovers were just atrocious again. Especially at the blue line. These blue line turnovers are just, you're setting yourself up to have to defend a breakaway. And on the Clifton one, like, he's trying to defend the breakaway, and on Entwistle, and he looks over his shoulder and, like, doesn't even look at Entwistle for the last for 2 seconds, and then next thing you know, he's scoring. And yeah, defensively they made some bad mistakes, but the turnovers really killed them, and then they end up leading 3-2 at one point, and then immediately every time they scored, it felt like within the next minute Chicago scored right after. So any chance for momentum or like a lift just was instantly snuffed out.
I feel like this is a reminder for people that all year they say, well, you know, the Bruins have only lost 5 games in regulation all year, or 6 or 7 or 8. How are they going to lose 4 in a 7-game series? And I agree with that, but at the same time, you know, they've lost 3 or 4, and I guess it's just a reminder of how quick things can go bad if you start playing with or stop playing with the strong habits that you've been playing with all year. Things happen quick in the playoffs, and I think my concern for this team is just finding that motivation to you know, there's been some injuries they're dealing with. There's not a ton that they're playing for in the standings in particular. So are we going to, you know, early April can come around or mid-April whenever the playoffs start, and if it's just a reminder, if they don't have their, you know, their game where it needs to be, they can fall just like anybody else because it's just a different season. It's a different mentality. And I don't know. I mean, I feel like the Detroit home and home, it was just kind of like a weird schedule. I don't know. They found a way to win one of them. Chicago, what's your motivation going to Chicago right now? You're playing a team, as Scott mentioned, is in the running for the lottery. Okay, you're the fastest team to 50 wins in NHL history. You're not going anywhere in the standings. Your playoff spot's solidified. What are these guys playing for other than pride at this point and to keep good habits? And I just feel like that's why they're just playing uninspired hockey from what I see. And then as far as that Clifton-Forbort pairing, you think part of that is just the tinkering that they've been doing on the back end with the 7-man rotation, that they've kind of lost their mojo a little bit?
I don't know if it's that simple. I mean, look, everyone knew there was going to be some rotation and tinkering. So I feel like if you're in there, you've got to make the most of it. Like having a game off, you know, shouldn't kill like what Forbort and Clifton have had. Like they shouldn't have forgotten how to play together. But in the 9, so I looked this up, in the 9 games since the Bruins acquired Orlov, Forbort and Clifton have been together for 5 of them. Both have been rotated out twice now, so that accounts for the other 4 games. The Bruins have been outscored 6-2 when they've been on the ice at 5-on-5. They were on for, as I mentioned, 3 goals against Chicago. You know, I feel like you can cite that if you want, like say like, oh, well, they're only playing every other game together instead of every game. All right, but you still have to make the most of it when you're in there, and they're not right now. And when you're talking, you know, I almost get it. Like if Bergeron, Marchand, Pasternak, McAvoy, like if they kind of went through the motions for a game, it's like, yeah, those guys know where they are in the lineup. Like they know what their role is. They know what they can do. They know the seasons they're having. You know, like that's where I could look and be like, okay, what are they really playing for on a Tuesday night in Chicago? But when you get down to those guys who are actually fighting for ice time, whose, you know, spots in a playoff lineup are up for grabs, that's where I'm like, what is happening there? Like for Forbort and Clifton to have a bad game, whatever you want to say about chemistry or being disrupted by the rotation or whatever, like Clifton giving up while chasing Mackenzie Entwistle back into his zone. I mean, that's just like an effort thing, or maybe you just read it wrong. You thought he was going to stay to the outside, but like that's not even like a chemistry getting disrupted thing. You know, Forbort losing a battle in the corner and then losing track of Joey Anderson, who I think had 3 goals all season, getting blown by Boris Kachuk, who I think also had 3 goals on the season. Like that's, I don't know. Those are just like poor individual plays, and those are the guys who should be motivated the most to keep up good habits, to keep up playing the right way, because they're the ones, you know, actually fighting to stay in the lineup. So for me, like that becomes less the rotation or motivation or whatever. Like that becomes less of an excuse for those guys towards the bottom of the lineup. And, you know, I thought the 4th line had a fairly quiet game Tuesday night, but like those were guys who over the weekend, the last few games before this, you could tell they were motivated. Like you could tell Greer, Hathaway, Nosek, like those guys were playing. I think Trent Fredericks had a couple good games recently.
Thought he had a great game yesterday.
Yeah, like so those are guys where it looks like they get it and they're bringing it, even if maybe the top guys are, you know, hitting the snooze button a little bit. Forbort Clifton, I think they've had a tough stretch recently though.
Yeah. Do you think at all, guys, that I mean, in a lot of seasons, and really this one, it hasn't come up all that much because they have no, like, there hasn't really been like a peak. It's been like a at the top plateau. But you know, a lot of times people talk about peaking at the right time or you know, struggling at the wrong time. Would you consider this, if you know, if this kind of extends out a little bit longer, to be struggling at the wrong time? Or would you consider this maybe a kick in the ass that they needed? Because sometimes, you know, there's still a month to handle this stuff at this point. Obviously, the rotating and the game management, whatever, is going to affect it a little bit. But do you think that March isn't necessarily the worst time to go through some of this stuff, and hopefully Montgomery and say Bergeron, Foligno, any of the leaders could just go, okay, well now, like, we got to cut this shit out. Like we can't, we have to make these adjustments. We're not just going to cruise by every team.
Yeah, I think it's better to happen now for sure. I mean, you mentioned you want to be playing your best hockey entering the playoffs. Well, they're not entering the playoffs right now. So I guess alternatively, like right now, they could be having a great stretch of hockey like they've had all year, and then have this happen, you know, 3 weeks from now, and then you're kind of talking. Maybe it's a little bit scarier, but to your point, they have a month or so to kind of right the ship here. I don't know if it's as simple. Hockey's a complex game. I don't know if it's as simple as just saying, all right, guys, let's turn it around here, because there's just a lot of nuances to the game. I just feel like that they're lacking confidence in and continuity.
I think there's a lot of mental lapses as well that are probably controllable, like on the turnovers.
Yeah, I mean, turnovers is something that, you know, you should only have on Thanksgiving, because it's not something that really should be in the game as frequent as it is with certain players in particular, because that's all mental, and that's just you know, unintelligent hockey, and that's preventable, right? But yeah, I mean, you think back to the first time these two teams played earlier this year, and it quite literally looked like you know, this 1980 Soviets versus the Czech B team. Like the Bruins just were literally in a league of their own against the Blackhawks, and I know the Blackhawks were a lowly ranked team back then, but they still are now. And you know, so I don't know if that speaks more to the Blackhawks having a terrible day the first time they played, or if the Blackhawks kind of just, you know, I don't know if they were motivated to kind of avenge that game, but because it was pretty embarrassing for them. But I guess to keep it to your question, Bridget, yeah, it's better for this to happen now, and there is time for them to get back on track, obviously.
Yeah, what's concerning for me though is like when it piles up now to 4 straight games now where they've had, you know, basically taken off like long stretches of the game. You know, the one win in the stretch over Detroit on Saturday, they were still god awful for that first period. Like they finally woke up and ended up winning the game. But, you know, there's now 4 straight incomplete games where they weren't even close to a 60-minute effort. And I think I would feel a little better if it was like one bad game and then they got it together the next game, dominated, you know, cruise to a 4-1 win. It's when it starts to pile up like this where you're like, okay, yeah, it's still not panic time. There's still time to fix it, but you don't want to get too far away. Like you don't want to get to a point where you've gone a week and a half, 2 weeks since the last time you really played well. You know, you don't want to start stringing together 4 down games in a row. And again, they're going to be facing another really desperate team on Thursday in the Winnipeg Jets. If you're not bringing it, that could be 5. Like it's, you know, you look over the weekend, Minnesota, Buffalo. Like Buffalo's kind of slipped out, but they probably still think they have a chance. Minnesota's right there; they've been rolling. You know, like I want to see. It doesn't have to be 2 weeks straight of great play where they just dominate everyone. You know, I know they just had a 10-game winning streak. I'm not saying they need to go do that again, but can you give, you know, 1 60-minute effort, maybe 2 in a row? Like, just don't have these pile up. That's where I kind of get concerned, is like the the more it kind of lingers, the further away you get from playing the way that you know you're capable of playing and know you have to play in the playoffs. I think the harder it becomes like to get it back, because now you've gone a week or two since you really felt that.
Do you think too, though, that like maybe not playing against playoff teams is making it feel not like it makes it feel not important, and you also kind of played down? Like, say you put them up against Tampa Bay this week, you know, is it a different outcome?
Maybe, but I mean, Edmonton's a playoff team and a potential Stanley Cup team with the moves they made, and they took the second and third periods off in that game. So, you know, yeah, Detroit and Chicago, I guess it's like harder, but I don't know. We're going to find out, you know, again, they have the stretch coming up and now Thursday, Saturday, Winnipeg and Minnesota. Those, you know, they're not rivals in your conference, but they're playoff teams out west. So we'll see if they get back on track for those, but I'm sure it's a factor. I do concede that it's probably tough for them to get up for non-playoff teams right now. But again, like, if anything, pride should kick in. They should be embarrassed that they've lost 2 in a row to non-playoff teams. Agreed.
And you know, and it's their job, right? It's their job to go out there and give it an honest effort every night. But yeah, for me, it's like one of the concerning things too is like, all year, the third period, they've been the best third period team. Scott just mentioned Edmonton. Like, they obviously didn't play well in that third period against Edmonton and lost them the game, right? They walk into that final frame up in the game, ahead in the score, and they lose that game. They just got outworked for 20 minutes to close that one out. But then the Detroit games, they weren't ready to play. So it was the first periods that were abysmal, and then they woke up a little bit later. And then last night, again, you have a 3-2 lead in the third period, you just shit the bed. So when they choose to kind of wake up and fall asleep has been very inconsistent. But Scott, to kind of play devil's advocate and Bridget as well, like, do you feel as though perhaps that having a consecutive stretch of poor play like this helps eventually drill home certain messages that, you know, we aren't unstoppable. We are human. We're not this automatic win machine. And it helps kind of humble them a little bit as opposed to like having a bad game where they kind of pull off the win. And so they're like, you know, we won, or, you know, you have a bad game, you lose, you come back with a 4-1 win like you talked about. And it kind of just like, I don't know. I feel like this could actually be a good thing, maybe, because it could help just drill home certain things. Like, while it's not ideal, you don't want to see this, it could in the long run maybe be a benefit. Maybe. That's
what I meant when I was saying like slumping at the wrong or right time. Like, this is a good time to get a kick in the ass a month out from the playoffs. Like, and especially considering this season, they've at times seemed like they were coasting. And that they, like you're saying, they could win. Even there was even part of yesterday that I thought they were going to win that game. Despite, you know, we haven't even mentioned like Bertuzzi hitting both posts and the puck staying out, and they called it a goal on the ice, but it never went in. But like there were, and then like Pastrnak gets a penalty shot and doesn't get an actual shot on that. Like there were chances in that game where it looked like they had been outplayed, yet you're still thinking they might still win this. Like I mentioned, they were leading 3-2 at one point. After, if that goal had gone in from Bertuzzi, we're talking about a different game. Like, and if, you know, Pastrnak scores and Bertuzzi, like it even had times looked like they're still going to find a way to win it despite being outplayed by a lesser team. But no, I agree. I think that's how you have to look at it, is as like okay, wow, we don't want to be embarrassed. Like, we don't want to be this team going into the playoffs that's like this super team, best team that Boston has ever had, you know, one of the best teams the league has ever seen in over 100 years, and just go out in the first round. How embarrassing would that be? So like maybe just a taste of bad, you know, just like a bad taste in your mouth. You don't want it to happen again. It kind of, I feel like the right personalities on the team to handle it the right way. And you guys say like the pride, pride needs to kick in. I feel like they do all have a lot of pride in not just beating, like not just playing well against teams that they know they have to beat. Like, I don't think that they do take they at least wouldn't tell you that they wanted to, treat any game on the schedule like it was like an easy win and whatnot. So I think that the pride is there, and we're about to find out, I guess. But another discouraging thing was the power play. I feel like the penalty kill got more chances than the power play. I don't have the statistics in front of me, but I just feel like, I mean, they had higher quality chances on their penalty kill, which you should not be. That shouldn't be what's going on.
Yeah. Before I get to power play, just one note on what you guys were just touching on. Like, we have seen or heard Jim Montgomery now a couple times actually call out their effort, work ethic after a couple of these games recently, which, to Brian's point, like, that's not something he's been able to do this season. So, and if he does that after one bad game, it maybe lands a little flat where the guys are like, come on, man, like, it's just one bad night, like, give us a break. Okay, well, now it's been 4, so he can say that, and it actually lands. Like, there's actually weight behind it, because they all know, like, they know they haven't been good enough. So yeah, you can, enforce some messages a little more strictly, and know that you're not doing it just for the sake of, hey, I got to try to pick out something, for these guys to work on, focus on type thing. Like, no, you can actually genuinely say, this isn't good enough. This isn't up to our standard. Yeah. So on special teams, I don't know, like the power play, I feel like a broken record. They need more movement. Like, there's too much standing around. There's too much, both on entries and in the zone. They're just too slow. Like, and I guess this kind of reflects their overall game. That's really kind of slowed down and doesn't seem to be in top gear. But obviously with the power play, it's lasted longer. This is now basically like a 20-game stretch. We're basically talking about a quarter of the season where it hasn't been very good. And yeah, it's like, it's too much of the horizontal movement at the blue line, getting inside the zone and like standing there and closing on them. Guys just kind of setting up in their positions and not moving around. And I don't know, I don't know what the fix is. I don't know if they need to change personnel again to do some sort of shakeup. Again, I don't think it's Orlov's fault that like the top unit hasn't clicked with him there. I think he walked onto a unit that already wasn't clicking, and turns out he wasn't the magic elixir that fixed everything. But it's on all 5 guys on the ice. It's not just him. It was struggling with McAvoy there. If you put Lindholm or Grzelcyk there and everyone else is still not moving the puck and not moving their feet enough, it's still going to struggle. So, yeah, I don't know. I don't know what they need to get going, or how many. And that's the other thing. Like, they haven't had a ton of practice time with this schedule. I think they had, 2 full prices last week. But one was a day that Bergeron and Krejci were off, and I don't, trying to remember. I was there. I don't think they did any special teams work that Monday. So it was really only Wednesday. And now you get into another stretch where they're getting very few practices in on this road trip. So they have to figure it out in game and in video sessions, because they're not going to get the on ice practice work where they can just devote 20 minutes to it. But yeah, it feels like a lot of the same stuff over and over again.
Yeah, I mean, I think the solution is just to break through a little bit here and there and get some confidence going. I don't think Orlov is the guy there for long term. I had no issue with the experiment, but I mean, I feel like Lindholm is the best defenseman on the team at getting pucks to the net, getting pucks through. I would try him for a cup of coffee, and if that doesn't work out, just go back to McAvoy and just hope these guys can figure it out, because, I mean, there's too much talent for them to keep struggling. I think ultimately they're pressing hard, so just got to just going to break through eventually. And I think, honestly, confidence sometimes is the explanation for a lot of things, or lack thereof. Just depends. Bridget, I feel like you mentioned off the top, the first goal Ullmark let in wasn't great.
Mm-hmm.
Either one of you feel as though they have the best goalie tandem in the league, right? So even if one of them is struggling, chances are the other guy's going to pick him up. I guess my question is, Ullmark's round one, game one start isn't necessarily a sure thing at this point, right? I mean, despite his season, if he's struggling going into, not that he has been struggling, he's just let a couple weak goals in that he hasn't let in all year recently. But hypothetically, if he were struggling going into the playoffs, would you guys feel confident just letting him start round one, game one, based off of the macro scope of his season? Or are you playing it more on like a week by week basis? Like whoever's giving you the best chance to win, you have confidence in both guys to put them in?
I mean, for me, Ullmark is still the clear number one right now. So that's not in doubt to me. I mean, I think it's really just been one bet, one off game Tuesday night, and maybe, another goal or two here and there. I didn't think Swayman was great on Sunday either. So it's not like he had been rolling for a long stretch before that, but it's not like the most recent thing we saw from him was amazing either. Yeah, I mean, I think there's still time for it to play out. Like, I guess if Ullmark hits a little bit of a prolonged skid and Swayman finishes strong, then sure, I would go with the hot hand. But I think I'm still a ways from that. Like, that would still need to happen over, I don't know, a 10-game sample or something.
Which, how many games do we even have left?
Yeah, as it is, I'm still very confident in Ullmark, and I think he's earned that start, and it's not too much of a discussion in my mind. Like, I'm still probably 75-25 towards Ullmark.
Yeah, I agree. I'm not there yet, but the goaltending situation, it did come into my mind that, like, basically if Ullmark has his normal performance in that game, we're not talking about a loss. Like, most of the time this season, his performance has been enough for them to get away with wins, even when they haven't played well, like we've alluded to a little bit earlier. And like, maybe Clifton's lack of hustle on the breakaway goal by Entwistle doesn't affect them, and they're not losing, like, in their, they're not out to such a slow start, and you're not losing by one after the first period. But he at times has bailed them out. I think maybe they need to learn how to play a little bit where you're not expecting, like, you know how it is. Like, when you have a goalie that's incredible, sometimes you play a little bit differently in front of him than when he's a rookie goalie. Like, maybe you don't treat him like he's going to handle every single thing. And, you'll be able to cut down on some of the bad habits, I guess, defensively.
Yeah, I agree with what you guys said about both goalies. And Scott, you make a good point as well about Swayman had a pretty tough game in Detroit. That fourth goal, which ended up being the game winner in particular, that was just very, very unlike him. I was just more so asking the question because both guys have been so good this year. It's like you have confidence in either one. And it's like if one was playing significantly better than the other going into the playoffs, that was kind of the gist of my question. Less about, the recent play, just more of a question in general. Did you guys have any other takeaways from this game in particular? Because there is some league news I feel like that will could potentially affect the Bruins in a positive way down the line. But if there's anything before we get to that from the game you still wanted to go over, now would be the time.
No, I think I'm good.
Yeah, I just thought that third line was probably their best line. That was really it. We kind of already touched on it. Frederick had a good game. Coyle played a strong game. Bertuzzi was right there, almost scored. Still probably could get more from him, but he did assist on that Frederick goal. So really, that was the bright spot, was the third line. That's all I have to say about that. So yeah, we can move on to some of the league stuff if you guys want.
Okay.
Also, on Bertuzzi, it was good to see him actually use his shot a bit. We mentioned the double dunk off the post, but he did have two other shots, which obviously isn't a ton, but it at least looked like he was taken a little bit more of a shot mentality, because he had just 5 shots on goal through his first 4 games, and for a guy who had 30 goals last year and for his career has been a good shooter, I think his career shooting percentage is like 14 or 15%. You want him to use that, and I thought you at least saw a few signs in the right direction on Tuesday, and I also think like it would be good just to give him a few games running with Coyle and Frederick, and not. I get wanting to move him around, see how he looks with different guys. Like that was totally logical, but now I feel like because he had maybe been struggling a little bit, things weren't really breaking for him. Like now, give him like a decent run on one line, let him get comfortable, let him kind of find his footing there, start to use his shot more. I also thought Coyle used the shot a little bit more, which now given like I feel like most of his shots Tuesday night were kind of from the outside, which is a little different. But he had gone through that stretch. Like Nesson did like a montage of like 3 or 4 plays where he had chances like inside the dots and passed, and it was just like, oof, like
he did, and he did
does
that,
not look good.
He did that once, at least that I can remember.
Yeah.
Against Chicago too, but then like a few seconds later, he's like, "Oh yeah, that's right. I should probably shoot." Yeah, he's been doing that, and I think that just comes from the kind of player he is, just more of a playmaker than a guy that should shoot. But he definitely has been in positions where he should have been the one shooting, and you'd like to see that work for him. But that line as a whole, I thought had a decent game, and there was a scary moment where I thought Marchand might have gotten hurt, and that can kind of transition us into the league news that we wanted to talk about, because Andrei Svechnikov had suffered an injury and was going to get a second opinion to see if his season was going to be over, and it came out yesterday that he had to have season-ending surgery, and that is just such a huge loss for Carolina.
Yeah, I mean, it potentially completely changes the conference. Like that Carolina team, we've talked about it before, how they play extremely well as a team, but lack some real oomph offensively at times. They don't really have offensive stars. He was, I think, 3rd on the team in goals and 2nd and 3rd in points. Like he was about as close to an offensive star, I guess you could say, like as they had, and just beyond the points, like he brings physicality. We saw what he did on the forecheck against Hampus Lindholm last year with a really hard, clean hit that concussed Lindholm. Now that's gone. Like they lose that really kind of traditional power forward. They lose his offense. They lose the physicality, the forechecking that he brings. Again, like the Hurricanes play great team hockey. I don't think this is, completely the end for them. I'm not totally writing them off, but it's a big loss. And for a team that already, sometimes struggles offensively, it's going to be, much tougher for them now.
By the way, just to add, it was an ACL. So ACL surgery is not, you're not coming back from that right away. So they've already announced he's out for the rest of the season. And it sucks for him. And because I can think back to the bubble where he was playing really good hockey and got hurt on a freak play with Chara. And, people were mad at Chara for, I think it was like right over top of the net, if I remember correctly. That ended his season that year. And I feel like his ceiling is really high. Like, I feel like we haven't seen the best of Andrei Svechnikov yet. He's only 22. And I just feel like every time he really starts to get going, he has something like this happen to him. And his ceiling is much higher than what we've seen. And that's what makes him such a dangerous player to play against in the playoffs, because he's big and we know what he can do, but there's also a level to it of his game that I think he could even reach a higher level. So it's a huge loss for them. That is I want to say worst case scenario for who you could lose. There's a few guys that if you lost them, you're going to be in some decent trouble. But Andrei Svechnikov is just such a presence for that team, skill wise and size wise, and even a little bit of a pest at times. So huge loss for them. It does change the matchup because, like you guys mentioned, last season he was a pain for the Bruins to play against, and it makes that team less dangerous. It changes their depth as well. It changes the way that lineup has to look.
Yeah, I mean, thank God they went out at the deadline and got some use their $10 million cap space to get some depth in case something like this happens.
I knew that was coming. I knew that was coming.
Well, it's true. I mean, they sat on their hands, and that's what they get. I mean, obviously, I'm not glad somebody got hurt, but like, from an organizational standpoint, like you had $10 million of cap space in a Stanley Cup aspired team in season.
I was told that they're just a really cheap organization and they don't want to, like, they won't pay for, like, and that's one of the reasons why Rod Brindamore waited for them to confirm that all of his staff would come back before he signed his contract, because he doesn't trust ownership, and like that he just thinks they make decisions that, like, the decisions they make his life harder. And to have to work with what they give him is like he's trying to work with less than what other teams get, because of the cheapness and the ownership that's there. So you're right. This is exactly why the Bruins added, say, a Bertuzzi. They could have used someone like that.
Well, and they also lost Max Pacioretty too earlier in the year. So
which they already knew at that point that the deadline was there.
Which made their trade deadline and lack thereof just that much more baffling. But now it's like, I mean, as it pertains to the Bruins, you take away the best player. I think the best all-around forward, at least. You can make the argument for Aho, but I mean, just because of the physicality he brings, we saw it firsthand last year, and the fact that he's 22 blows my mind. I thought he was at least 24, but
I know, I did too. I just looked it up.
Yeah,
22.
You take that guy off of their team. That's the biggest. You're taking the best offensive all-around player on Carolina, who's offensively challenged anyway, and the biggest threat to the Bruins, taking him off that team. So if the Bruins end up playing them in the conference finals, if the Bruins can take care of their side of the bracket, I mean, I think it's a bigger injury than if they got somebody hurt in the back end, because I think Carolina's defensive depth is so much better than their offensive depth that they could have weathered that storm, no pun intended, a little bit better. But Aho goes out, Svechnikov goes out, and that's tough. That's a tough pill to swallow. So it's huge news for the Eastern Conference contenders outside of Carolina. I mean, it's huge news for them too, but in a negative way. So was there any other league news you guys wanted to hit on before we jump off?
No, I don't think. Steven Stamkos got banged up on Saturday, but it doesn't sound like that's anything serious. So everyone's kind of dealing with these. Obviously, Carolina has the most devastating one now, knowing Svechnikov is out for good. But everyone's kind of dealing with these little injuries, and I think a lot of these teams that know based more or less like what spot they're in for the playoffs, it's like just get to the finish line, just have guys back by game one, which is obviously what the Bruins are hoping for with Hall and Foligno, where, it sounds like they're going to be right around that time, maybe miss like a couple playoff games, but
I would like an official statement about it at some point from someone, like from the team, not just from like the background reporting that's been done. It would be nice to like actually hear it from someone else, that like someone that knows from the team, whether or not that reporting is accurate.
Yeah, I don't think we're going to get that though. Like, I think I said this before. I think they're just going to leave it open-ended and more or less leave people guessing. Like, they obviously know internally, and I think Emily Kaplan's probably getting her information like from someone who would know, which is why she had something resembling a timetable. But I also think like if you're the Bruins and you're like, oh yeah, they're expected back, 4 weeks from now, whatever. Like, people are gonna do that math and be like, oh well, that's convenient. So like just for the start of the playoffs. So I think when you leave it more open ended, it's hey, they're just gonna come back whenever, and they'll pop up on the ice before practice or at practice one day, and all of a sudden it's, well, that's when they were cleared. We didn't know they were gonna be back for game one type thing.
When's the last day of like the amount of time Hall has to be out for? The end of the LTIR.
probably coming up in like the next week or so.
Yeah.
I don't know exactly.
Yeah, it's before the end of the season, so
yeah.
Anyway, could be interesting if he comes back right after that. But I do think he'll probably be out till right about, was the last game of the season April 13th against Montreal.
That sounds right.
13th or 14th against Montreal. So that still gives us another month here for those guys to get back. But anyway, yeah, no, I don't think I have anything else around the league. At least I'm not thinking of it right now, guys. But it is our anniversary, our 2-year anniversary from when we took over the podcast, which is crazy because it doesn't, like, it simultaneously feels longer and not that long at the same time. Like, I feel like we've been doing this for more than just the last 2 seasons. And like a lot has changed. Like now we have a video component of this. Like if you're watching this on YouTube, we just started doing that. Things have changed quite a bit. There's been more of a focus on podcast material for the station and whatnot. But yeah, happy 2 years, guys.
Yeah, very exciting. It's perfect to have my birthday and this anniversary lineup. Like, just makes for a great day. I'm gonna celebrate by I don't know, doing some snow cleanup because we actually got snow in Lowell. I guess
no snow.
Yeah, I guess like Boston and South of the city got nothing. But yeah, congrats to us, and as always, thank you to everyone who listens, because it has also grown in listenership, which is exciting. And we like hearing from you guys. We like emails, tweets. Yeah, obviously a very exciting time to be doing a Bruins podcast during a historic season.
Makes our life easier.
Yeah, the playoffs are going to be really fun. Like, this is kind of the stretch where and we sort of knew this would happen, where you get past the excitement of the trade deadline and all that, and now it's like, okay, what are they really playing for? What's like actually important right now? So I think that's part of why we kind of make so much of like, oh, they hit a 4-game struggle, and it's like, we're not trying to have hot takes or anything. I know there are people on radio doing that, but it's like, we got to talk about something. And right now, the something is that they're struggling and they're not playing the way we know that they're capable of.
I echo everything you guys said. Thank you, everybody, for listening. 2 years has been great with you guys. Longest relationship in my life, so it's been great. All right, so the Bruins play tomorrow night and then Saturday. So enjoy the game tomorrow. Hopefully they right the ship. And if you guys have nothing else, we will talk to you soon.